Okay, so a lot to get through today, lots of calculations to go through. We're going to continue on with the PowerPoints. What we're talking about here today is most of our calculations are going to center around figuring out what our overtime rate is and what our total pay is for individuals who are non-exempt from the FLSA. So they're entitled to overtime pay for hours over 40, but they're paid on a salaried basis. So they have maybe a set monthly salary or a set amount that they're paid on a weekly basis. We've got to figure out if they work overtime, we've got to figure out what that overtime rate is so that they get paid the proper overtime rate for the hours over 40 that they work. So, let me get over to we have, and I've written up here, I tried to use the proper language to describe everything in steps. Now, as I said in my last class, I am not an English teacher, so my description of it, I think it's accurate now, but I did have some mistakes in the first class. I just didn't describe it properly. But these are the steps when we want to convert a period wage. So that means somebody's paid a certain amount per pay period. Let's say $1,000 on a semi-monthly basis. So twice a month they're paid $1,000. But they're entitled to overtime pay if they worked over 40 hours in a week. How we then calculate what their overtime pay is and add that to their regular salary. Okay?
Hello.
Hi. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. And a lot of these steps involve figuring out what that overtime rate should be for purposes of this calculation. So the first thing we have to do is annualize our salary, meaning we have to convert, if we don't already know what the annual salary is, we have to convert what we do know into an annual salary. So if we know what they're paid per month, we're going to multiply that by 12. If we know what they're paid on a semi-monthly basis every two times a month, then we're going to multiply that by 24 to get whatever that annual salary is. We then take that annual salary and we've got to figure out what they're paid on a weekly basis. So we know that there are 52 weeks in a year. So what we're going to do in this second step is we're going to take what we got in step one, we're going to divide it by 52 weeks to figure out what they're paid, their normal salary on a weekly basis. We're going to go through lots of examples here, by the way. So I know I'm talking about this and not writing anything down, but we will write a lot of stuff down. From that, then we're going to calculate what their hourly pay is. Most of our initial examples will assume that the person normally works 40 hours in a week. So in this case, we would calculate our hourly pay by taking what our weekly gross is, dividing it by 40 hours. That's how much they're making on an hourly basis, right? Then, from that information, we can figure out what the overtime rate is. We're just going to multiply that regular rate, hourly rate, multiply it by 1.5 to get what their overtime rate is. We'll then multiply the overtime rate times the number of overtime hours that they worked, and then add that total to what their regular salary is. Okay, so that's what these steps are up here. Feel free to take a picture of it if you like. Otherwise, I've got in the agenda, I've got something similar up here. I'm not sure that my wording was 100% right on that one, because the annual salary, this works if, well, how I describe the first step here doesn't always work. It works most of the time, but it doesn't always work. So I tried to do a different description up here. Anyway, it's up there as well, just to kind of remind you what those steps are. So let's, before we get to their examples, let's do one of our own. So let's say we have an individual and they make $2,500. Actually, do I want to put that there? Yeah, sure. $2,500 per month. That's their salary. That's the agreement. That doesn't mean they're paid on a monthly basis, but let's just say that they're paid on a monthly basis. Okay, so they're paid. They have. This is what they're paid, and this is what their salary is. So the first thing we want to do is we want to annualize that. So step one, we would take the $2,500 times 12 months to get $30,000. We've annualized their salary. Don't pay any attention to this part here. If they're paid monthly, that means normally if they didn't work any overtime, their paycheck, their gross paycheck is going to be $2,500 every month. Second step, we're going to take that result in step one, 30,000, and we're going to divide it by 52 weeks because we need to know how much they make on a weekly basis. So $576.92. So this is per year. This is per week. Step three. We're going to take the result from step 2, 576.92, and we're going to divide it by 40 hours to figure out what they make on an hourly basis. And be careful in your problems. Make sure you're rounding at the right point. Okay? So your problem will tell you, round your final answer, or round round intermediate answers to 3 decimal places or 2 decimal places. Just pay attention to the wording on those problems because it can change the final result if you round at the wrong place. I'm going to round right here. So 576.92 divided by 40 hours. So they make $14.42 an hour. Step 4. Now we're going to figure out what their overtime rate is. And we're just going to multiply that by 1.5. So we're using the common method of overtime here. $21.63. And then step 5, what we're going to do is we're going to take whatever that pay period salary is, which we have that up here, $2,500. Oh, we didn't say how many hours. Let's say they worked 7 hours of overtime during the month. We did on the timesheet, we figured out they worked 7 hours of overtime. So we're going to take the regular pay period salary and we're going to add 7 hours times the overtime rate of $21.63 $151.41. We're going to add, don't look at that. I'm also not a math teacher, so we'll get $26.51.41. This is our total pay. So this individual who is not exempt, meaning they do get overtime, they're entitled to overtime. During the month, they worked 7 hours of overtime. Their salary, they're usually paid $2,500 a month. Because they worked 7 hours of overtime, we calculated what that overtime rate is, added it to their regular pay. They're entitled to gross pay of $2,651.41 for the month. I've got several other examples that we can go through. Just right now, we're going to add some complications to this. Like, for example, okay, well, what if they're not paid on a monthly basis? They're paid on a bi-weekly basis. Well, let's just say that. Let's do that instead. So we'll still say they worked 7 hours of overtime. And let's say they get $2,000 bi-weekly. How many pays a year is bi-weekly? 26, right. So we got 26 pays. And this is one pay period. But let's just say they have, how am I doing this? Actually, let me change this a second. So let's say they make $4,000 monthly, but they are paid bi-weekly. You get to see me on my tippy toes. I need about 4 more inches, and I keep praying for it, and it's not happening. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, we're going to annualize our salary. They're paid $4,000 a month. We're still going to multiply that by 12, right? So what is that, 48,000 per year? Yeah. Now, because we're going to need to know what they're paid every pay period. And we're going to need that information for step 5 here because we've got to add their pay period salary. We kind of have this step 1A in this example because we know what they're paid. Their salary is on a monthly basis, but right now we don't know what they're paid bi-weekly, every pay period. So we've got to figure that out. So that's kind of our step 1A here. So let's figure that out. So we've got, they've got $48,000 a year. They're paid 26 pays. Let me put this down here. I know I'm kind of all over the place here, but so let's take 48,000. That's what we're doing here for step 1A. We're going to take their annual salary and we're going to divide it by the number of pays per year. Again, this is kind of just an aside. We're going to need this information down here. So they're paid $1846.15. Okay. You can just kind of set that to the side. We're not going to need it right now. Now we're going to calculate their regular weekly gross. So we're going to take the 48,000 divided by 52 weeks in a year. So 48 divided by 52. $923.08 per week. We got to convert that into an hourly rate. So $923.08 divided by 40 hours. Again, we're assuming they work 40 hours. One of the complications that we're going to add is what happens when they don't normally work 40. Like if their contract is 35 hours or 30 hours. Changes the calculation a little bit. So $923.08. So $23.08 per hour. And we'll take that, 23.08, sorry. Did I get that right? Yeah. 8 times 1.5 to figure out their overtime rate. $34.62. Okay, this last step, we're going to take their pay period salary, what we calculated over here, $1846.15, plus 7 hours of overtime at $34.62 an hour. 242.34. $2,088.49 total pay. So this individual who has a salary of $4,000 a month, paid on a biweekly basis, who worked 7 hours of overtime during that biweekly time period, is entitled to $2,088.49 for their gross pay during that pay period. Questions?
When exactly will you have to know the exact gross pay for someone being paid bi-weekly? Like, and why would they need to know that, I guess?
Well, you mean why do we need this step?
Why would,
That's okay.
Okay, so if they're,
Mm-hmm.
never mind. So this is the bi-weekly version. I'm thinking annual, so I apologize.
Right, no, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. So that's where, and that shows you where, like, this kind of subtotal is necessary, because if it's not, like, if they're paid on a weekly basis, then this is pretty easy. We don't need to do that little extra part there. We already have that information, right?
I was going to ask about that, like 1A versus taking like a regular week and knowing that it's bi-weekly, you would multiply it by 2.
You could do that as well, absolutely.
But you're off by the penny.
You could be.
Yes. So
Yes.
in this case, you would be.
Yes. So follow these. The correct way would be the consistent way, whichever way you always follow. So in your textbook teaches you this way to do it in these steps. So I would follow these steps, because you're right, you could be off by a penny because of all the rounding and everything. And yeah, I would do this, but as far like legally, I think as long as you're consistent with how you do it. Yeah. Other questions? All right, let's look at some of the examples that we've got in the text here. So, well, I guess I'll do this. I'll write it down as we're going, even though they've got it up here. Sometimes it just helps with the brain to process if you see it being written down, or if you write it down yourself, that's even better. All right, so we've got Farron. Again, non-exempt. These are all non-exempt employees. They're entitled to overtime. If they were exempt, we wouldn't care. They don't get overtime pay. Non-exempt, $1,500 a month. He's paid weekly. So in this case, we don't have to do that extra little step here, because we're going to know what that weekly pay, what that pay is. You'll see in the next ones, because it's not weekly, we have to do that little step 1A. That little side step there. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to annualize his pay. So he makes $1,500 a month, 12 months, $18,000 per year. Then we're going to take the $18,000, and you'll see each step follows the previous step. So everything you're using the result from the last step as the first part of the next step. Divided by 52 gets us a weekly gross of $346.15 per week. Now we have to figure out what that is per hour. Divided by 40 hours, $865 per hour. Take the $865 again. So this goes here. This goes here. Times 1.5. This goes here. Gets us to $12.98. This is overtime. Then we're going to take our pay period salary, which is already the $346.15, plus how many hours of overtime? So he worked 3 hours. 3 times 12.98. They didn't multiply this out, but I like to. 38.94. Add those together, 385.09. It's total gross pay. So that's not what he's going to take home, obviously, because he's going to have to pay taxes and he may have other deductions, and we're going to get to those things in chapters 3 and 4. But right now, there's his total gross pay. Questions about this one? Okay. Okay. Now here, with Eve, because she's paid semi-monthly, we do have to do that little extra step there, because we got to figure out what she makes per pay period. Okay, so and it's not the reason we don't do it here is because step 2 already calculates that in this case because he's paid weekly. But for Eve, step 2 doesn't calculate that because she's paid semi-monthly. All right, so non-exempt, she's paid $2,000 a month, and she's paid semi-monthly. She worked 4 hours of overtime in one pay period. Now, you could do the first couple of steps in your head, because if she's paid $2,000 a month and she's paid on a semi-monthly basis, you know automatically she's going to be paid $1,000, twice a month. But we're going to go through the steps here anyway. So 2,000 times 12, 24,000 annual. All right, so here's that extra step, kind of that step 1A to figure out what that semi-monthly gross is. I'm going to put that actually over here. So we'll take the, what are we doing here? 24,000, this is 1A. Divided by the number of pay periods. Okay, 24, 1,000 per pay. Step 2, we're going to take 24,000 divided by 52 weeks. That's here. So $461.54 per week. Now we're going to convert that to an hourly basis. To get $11.54 per hour. Again, we're going to take that $11.54 times 1.5 to get an overtime rate of $17.31 overtime per hour. Now we're going to take the per pay amount, 1,000, because we want to know how much was she paid in this pay period, right? So $1,000 plus, and it says she worked 4 hours of overtime. 4 hours times 17.31. Oops. 69.24. So 1069.24. Hopefully I got the same. Yep. So there's her gross pay. Let's do another one. All right. Okay, so G is paid bi-weekly. So again, we're going to have to do that little 1A step because we've got to figure out how much she's being paid on that biweekly basis. All right, so $2,200 a month paid biweekly. She worked 11.5 hours of overtime during one pay period. So let's annualize this. 2,200 times 12. 26.4. All right, so let's do the step 1A now, because we're going to need that down here in that last step. So she is paid $26,400 a year, and she's paid biweekly. How many pays are there per year? 26, exactly. So 26,400 divided by 26 pays is, well, they did it down here. 101,538 is that result. So she didn't work any overtime. That's how much her gross pay would be, $1,015.38. But she did work overtime. So step 2, we're going to take the 26,400 divided by 52 weeks. So that part, like I said, they did it right there. I like to kind of put it to the side because it's not part of the original 5-step plan here. So 26,400 divided by 52 gets us 507.69. So in this case, you can see, so 507.69 times 2 does come to that 10,15.38. The rounding is fine in that case. But you could have situations like you were saying, that where maybe that's 507, it comes out to 507.70, and if you multiply it by 2, it would not be the correct per pay. So that's why you want to follow these steps. Then we're going to take that 507.69 divided by 40 to get us our hourly rate, $12.69. Get our overtime rate, $19.04. Overtime per hour. And then we're going to take that per pay amount, 10,15.38, and then add the amount of overtime. Would they say 11.5 hours? Times 19.04. $218.96. Add those together, $1234.34. Questions before we add some wrinkles? Okay. Let's bring this up.